A 500-year-old map shows a continent no one should have known about. This is the Piri Reis map, a 16th-century artifact that depicts Antarctica without its ice, a geographical impossibility for its time. By the end of this video, you will understand why this single piece of parchment threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about ancient history. How could a Renaissance admiral chart a landmass buried under miles of ice for millions of years? What forgotten civilization could have surveyed the entire globe long before recorded history began? What does it mean when the past holds a secret this profound? The year was 1929, deep within the ancient Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. A German theologian named Gustav Diesmann was sifting through a forgotten collection of manuscripts, a task of quiet, dusty scholarship. Then his hands brushed against a large piece of parchment, rolled and tucked away for centuries. As he carefully unrolled it, he revealed a stunning work of art and science, a world map drawn on gazelle skin. This was the work of an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis, completed in the year 1513. The map was beautiful, detailed, and immediately profoundly wrong. There, at the southern edge of the known world, was the clear, unmistakable coastline of a continent. It was a landmass that, according to all official records, would not be discovered by European explorers for another 300 years. This was Antarctica, but not as we know it. This depiction showed a land free of ice with flowing rivers, mountain ranges, and what appeared to be a realistic coastline. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map, explaining that he was not its original author. He stated he had compiled it from about 20 source charts and world maps, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. In a single moment, a historical artifact transformed into a historical impossibility. The map was real, the continent it showed was real, but the knowledge required to create it, according to everything we understood about history, simply could not exist. How could a 16th-century admiral, working with sources centuries older, chart a continent buried under thousands of feet of ice? The parchment in Diesmann's hands was no longer just a map. It was a question demanding an answer. The coastline drawn on that parchment held a secret waiting for modern technology to reveal. Look at the northern edge of the landmass Piri Reis labeled. Modern cartographers recognize it instantly, the region we call Queen Maud Land. The shape is not a guess or a fantasy. It is a precise rendering of a coastline no human eye had seen for millions of years. This is the first great anomaly. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, teams of scientists began using new technologies like seismic sounding and ice-penetrating radar to map what lay beneath Antarctica's colossal ice sheet. They were not looking for ancient maps, they were simply doing geology. What they found was a hidden world of mountain ranges, deep valleys, and riverbeds, all carved into the bedrock. When they finally pieced together the true subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land, they faced a baffling reality. The coastline on the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, matched their 20th-century seismic profiles with an accuracy that defied coincidence. It showed the land not as it appears under ice, but as it would appear if all that ice were simply lifted away. This was not a map of what was on the surface. It was a map of the ground itself. The man who first connected these dots was a university professor named Charles Hapgood. In the 1960s, while working with his students on historical cartography, Hapgood became obsessed with this discrepancy. He gathered the emerging geophysical data from Antarctic surveys and laid the Piri Reis map beside it. His conclusion, detailed in his book Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, was revolutionary and deeply unsettling. He proposed that the map was indeed a copy of a much older source map, one that depicted Antarctica in a period of geologic history when it was largely free of ice. This presented a chronological impossibility of staggering scale. The last time Queen Maud Land, or any of Antarctica, was in such a state was during a warm period in the Eocene epoch, a time that ended roughly 34 million years ago. Even the most generous interpretations of human civilization only go back a few thousand years, so the core question crystallizes with brutal clarity. How does a map from the Ottoman Empire contain data that reflects the literal bedrock of a continent, data that corresponds to a world 30 million years before the first humans walked the earth? The knowledge encoded in those lines should not exist, and yet there it is. But the coastline is only the first layer of the mystery. The true sophistication of the Piri Reis map is not just in what it shows, but in how it was drawn. Modern analysis reveals the map employs a highly advanced form of spherical geometry. Its center of projection, the mathematical anchor point from which the entire world is laid out, is located not in Turkey where Piri Reis worked, but near Cairo, Egypt. This is a critical detail. It means the original source charts were compiled by someone who understood the Earth as a sphere and knew how to translate its curved surface onto a flat piece of parchment without catastrophic distortion, a complex art known as spherical trigonometry. This knowledge was incredibly rare in 1513. While a spherical Earth was an ancient concept, the practical mathematics to map it accurately had been fragmented and lost in mainstream European cartography for centuries. Maps of Piri Reis's era were often beautiful but geographically chaotic, with continents stretched and compressed based on guesswork and folklore. Yet here, on this Ottoman map, we see a different standard. Cartographic historians have noted its surprisingly accurate longitudinal relationships between the coastlines of Africa and South America. Getting longitude right, especially across an ocean, was the single hardest problem in navigation until the invention of precise marine chronometers in the 18th century. It required an understanding of time and planetary motion that simply wasn't available to Renaissance sailors, so we are left with another profound anomaly. The map depicts a continent it shouldn't know exists, with a coastline it shouldn't be able to chart, using a mathematical framework it shouldn't possess. This isn't the work of a lucky guess or a talented artist working from vague traveler reports. This is the signature of a systematic survey, a coordinated effort to map the entire globe with a scientific precision that would not be seen again for hundreds of years. The Piri Reis map, then, begins to look less like a singular curiosity and more like a surviving page from a much older, much grander atlas, a fragment of a lost geographical science that surveyed the world in an age we have forgotten. Who could have performed such a survey, and what happened to that world-spanning knowledge? The most direct clues come from the mapmaker's own hand. In the margins of the parchment, Piri Reis wrote detailed notes in Ottoman Turkish, explaining his methods and his sources. He did not claim this vision of the world as his own discovery. Instead, he presented himself as a scholar and a compiler, carefully stitching together information from what he called about 20 older charts and mappa mundi. Among these sources, he specifically mentions maps from the time of Alexander the Great and others from the Arabs. This is a staggering admission. Alexander lived in the 4th century before the Common Era, over 1800 years before Piri Reis put ink to gazelle skin. The so-called Arab sources likely refer to the Golden Age of Islamic cartography, centuries earlier, which itself preserved and expanded upon knowledge from Greek, Persian, and Roman traditions. So the map we see is not a snapshot of the world in 1513. It is a palimpsest, a layered document where the most recent hand has traced over lines that are centuries, perhaps even millennia, old. Piri Reis was the last link in a very long chain. He had access to a library of ancient charts that depicted lands and coastlines with a precision that had been lost to the wider world. This reframes the entire mystery. The question is no longer how an Ottoman admiral knew these things. The real question becomes who created the original charts he was copying from, and where did that knowledge go? These source maps represented a corpus of geographic science, a systematic understanding of the planet's landmasses. One can imagine them stored in the great repositories of the ancient world, like the legendary Library of Alexandria, a center of learning that aimed to collect all human knowledge. Historical records tell us of the library's tragic loss, a series of events over centuries that scattered and destroyed countless scrolls and texts. Could the master surveys of an unknown ancient civilization have been among them? Could fragments have survived, passed from scholar to scholar, culture to culture, growing fainter with each copy until only a few precious sheets remained in an Istanbul palace? Piri Reis's annotations turn the map from an object into a story, a whisper from a past that insists it was more advanced, more connected, and more knowledgeable than our history books dare to suggest. The lines on the parchment are not just geography, they are the ghostly imprint of a lost world's intellect. What other secrets did those source maps contain, and what happened to the civilization that first dared to measure the entire Earth? The numbers involved here are not just large, they are almost incomprehensible in their scale. To grasp why this map is so deeply unsettling to conventional history, we have to step away from human calendars and into the vast, slow-moving clock of geology itself. The scientific consensus, built upon ice core samples, sediment layers, and fossil records, tells a very clear story. The continent of Antarctica has been locked under a permanent, continent-spanning ice sheet for a minimum of 15 million years. That is the most conservative estimate. Many geological models push the last significant ice-free period back even further, to a time around 34 million years ago, during a warm epoch when the planet looked utterly alien to our eyes. This is the established timeline of the Earth. Now place the human story beside it. Anatomically modern humans, beings just like us, have walked the Earth for roughly 300,000 years. The entirety of our written history, from the first Sumerian tablets to this very moment, spans a mere 5,000 years, so we are faced with a mathematical chasm of staggering depth. On one side, a map that appears to show a real, ice-free coastline. On the other, the unyielding fact that the land it depicts has been visually inaccessible for 15 million years at the very least. This creates the impossible core of the Piri Reis dilemma. If the map is genuinely showing us Antarctica as it once was, then the original surveys it was copied from must be older than the ice itself. They would have to originate from a time so profoundly ancient that it predates not just every known civilization, but the very existence of humanity as we recognize it. This is not a gap of centuries or even millennia. This is a gap of tens of millions of years. Such a proposition does not just tweak the edges of history, it demands a complete reimagining of our planet's past. It forces us to ask whether our understanding of time, progress, and even the rise of intelligent life on Earth is fundamentally incomplete. What paradigm could possibly make sense of a map that seems to remember a world 30 million years gone? Of course, the map's implications are so extraordinary that they invite equally intense skepticism. To accept the Piri Reis map as a genuine depiction of an ice-free Antarctica is to accept a historical revolution, and many scholars understandably push back, offering more conventional explanations rooted in the known world of Renaissance cartography. The central pillar of this counter-argument is that the mysterious southern landmass is not Antarctica at all. Instead, they propose it is a distorted, imaginative rendering of the eastern coastline of South America, a continent that European explorers like Amerigo Vespucci had only recently begun to chart. In this view, the mapmaker, working with fragmented and often contradictory sailor reports, simply extended the landmass southward, filling the empty space with speculative geography. This was a common practice of the era, born from a powerful intellectual drive to complete the map, to eliminate the terrifying blank spaces that whispered of the unknown. The Great Southern Continent, Terra Australis Incognita, was a theoretical landmass that had appeared on maps since ancient Greek times, believed to exist as a counterbalance to the northern continents. Critics argue that Piri Reis was likely influenced by this persistent myth, sketching in a conjectural land that bore only a passing, coincidental resemblance to the real Antarctica far below. Experts in historical cartography also question the precision of the match itself. They point out that the process of comparing a hand-drawn, 500-year-old parchment to a modern seismic profile is fraught with subjectivity. One can choose which features to align and which to ignore, potentially creating a convincing match through selective interpretation rather than objective measurement. The coastline might fit in one area, they argue, but diverge significantly in others when examined as a whole. Furthermore, the tools of Piri Reis's time simply could not produce the kind of spherical projection that Hapgood and others have attributed to the map, at least not through lost ancient science. Any apparent accuracy in longitude or shape, they suggest, is more likely the result of skilled guesswork, artistic license, and the blending of multiple Portolan charts, which were sailing guides focused on coastlines and landmarks rather than true continental scale. This academic perspective sees the map not as a fragment of impossible knowledge, but as a fascinating, albeit flawed, product of its time, a beautiful snapshot of a world on the cusp of discovery, still entangled with myth and speculation. This debate is not a simple conflict between fact and fiction. It is a clash of paradigms, of entire ways of seeing the past. On one side, a compelling visual and geometric anomaly that seems to defy linear history. On the other, a rigorous demand for evidence that fits within the established, documented timeline of human achievement. This tension is precisely what makes the Piri Reis map so endlessly fascinating. It refuses to be easily categorized. If the skeptics are entirely correct, we are left to wonder at the sheer, staggering coincidence of a mythical landmass accidentally mirroring a real one buried under miles of ice. But if even a fraction of the alternative theory holds weight, the implications ripple far beyond a single piece of parchment. It suggests our historical record is not just incomplete, but may be missing entire chapters, epochs of human or perhaps even pre-human endeavor that left only the faintest of echoes in the artifacts we later mislabeled as primitive. The map becomes a litmus test for our willingness to question the narrative we have been taught. Do we dismiss the anomaly to preserve the known timeline, or do we allow the anomaly to challenge the timeline itself? This unresolved question hangs in the air, leading us to the next logical step, to examine if this Ottoman map was truly alone, or merely the most famous piece of a much larger and even more puzzling cartographic puzzle. The debate over coincidence versus lost knowledge seemed to reach an impasse, a stalemate between two irreconcilable views of history. Then, in the 1960s, a university professor named Charles Hapgood stepped forward with a theory so audacious it attempted to bridge that very gap. He did not dismiss the map as a Renaissance fantasy, nor did he accept the impossible millions-of-year timeline. Instead, he proposed a third option, a cataclysmic geological mechanism that could reset the clock entirely. Hapgood called his idea Earth crust displacement. Imagine the outermost shell of our planet, the lithosphere, not as a collection of slowly drifting tectonic plates, but as a single, coherent skin. Hapgood suggested that under immense forces, perhaps from the uneven buildup of polar ice, this entire crust could occasionally slip as one unit over the molten mantle beneath. In a relatively short geological time frame, perhaps thousands of years instead of millions, entire continents could be relocated to new latitudes. This was the core of his radical proposition. He argued that Antarctica had not always been at the South Pole. According to his model, it could have once been situated much farther north, in a temperate climate zone where it was largely free of ice and potentially habitable. A sophisticated ancient civilization, perhaps one lost to the deep past, could have lived there, explored its coasts, and mapped its contours with precision. Then a catastrophic crustal shift occurred, sliding the continent to its current, frozen position at the bottom of the world. The ice sheet formed rapidly, burying the civilization and its achievements, leaving only fragmented copies of its maps to survive in other parts of the world, copies that eventually found their way into the hands of cartographers like Piri Reis. This theory was elegant in its problem-solving. It provided a plausible, if extraordinary, scenario where the map could be both ancient and accurate, created by human hands within a conceivable time frame. It directly explained the central paradox. The map showed a real, ice-free Antarctica because it was surveyed when Antarctica was, in fact, ice-free and located in a warmer part of the globe. Hapgood's geological mechanism, it must be noted, was met with intense skepticism and is largely rejected by modern geophysicists today. The established model of plate tectonics, with its gradual, piecemeal continental drift, does not support the concept of a sudden, wholesale slippage of the entire crust. Yet the cartographic side of Hapgood's work, his meticulous comparison of the Piri Reis map to modern subglacial surveys, carried a surprising weight. His findings were compelling enough to attract the attention of one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century. In the foreword to Hapgood's book, Albert Einstein wrote that the idea of crustal displacement was not implausible, and that Hapgood presented a formidable case that deserved serious consideration. Einstein's cautious endorsement did not validate the entire theory, but it elevated the mystery from fringe speculation to a legitimate historical puzzle worthy of scientific inquiry. Hapgood's legacy, therefore, is twofold. He provided the first comprehensive framework that took the map's anomalies seriously as data, not just art, and more importantly, he planted a profound and unsettling idea directly into mainstream historical discourse. He introduced the concrete possibility of a lost, advanced prehistoric culture, a civilization with the means and knowledge to chart the world, whose entire existence was erased by a planetary catastrophe. This was no longer about a single mysterious map. It was about the ghost of a forgotten world, a shadow in our past that the Piri Reis fragment seemed to remember. If Hapgood was even partially correct, what other echoes of that lost world might be hidden in plain sight? Hapgood's theory of a lost civilization inevitably leads us to a name that has echoed through millennia. When we speak of an advanced seafaring culture that vanished beneath the waves in a single catastrophic event, one story rises above all others. This is, of course, the legend of Atlantis, first recorded by the Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BC. In his dialogues, Plato describes a powerful island nation, a marvel of engineering and maritime prowess that existed 9,000 years before his own time. This places its supposed downfall around 9,600 BC. According to the tale, after a failed attempt to conquer the ancient world, Atlantis was swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of earthquakes and floods, disappearing forever. For centuries, this account has been debated, interpreted as a moral allegory about hubris, or dismissed as pure fiction. But what if, as some researchers have speculated, it was not a myth at all, but a distorted memory of a real historical event? The connection to our map mystery becomes tantalizingly clear. If a civilization as advanced as Plato's Atlantis truly existed over 11,000 years ago, with the naval capability to project power across oceans, would it not also possess the geographic knowledge to map the world? Could the source charts that Piri Reis referenced, the ones showing coastlines with impossible accuracy, be the surviving cartographic legacy of that lost culture? The timeline proposed by Hapgood's crustal displacement, though geologically disputed, creates a potential window, A civilization thriving in a temperate Antarctica or on a now submerged landmass could have charted the globe, including the ice-free contours of the southern continent, before their world was destroyed. Their maps, perhaps preserved in the few outposts that survived the cataclysm, could have been copied and recopied, passing through the libraries of Alexandria and the scholars of the Islamic Golden Age, growing fainter but never entirely lost. This speculative link transforms the Piri Reis map from an anomaly into a potential artifact. It becomes a piece of physical, albeit copied, evidence that aligns with an ancient narrative of loss. The legend speaks of a culture that mastered the seas, and the map implies a culture that mastered the science of the Earth itself. The parallels are too striking to ignore. Both involve a sophisticated society, both end in a sudden geological disaster, and both leave behind only fragments of their knowledge for later ages to puzzle over. Venturing into this territory requires a careful balance. The story of Atlantis resides in a space between history and mythology, a realm where literal interpretation often gives way to symbolic meaning. Scholars rightly caution against using a philosophical allegory as a historical textbook. Yet, the enduring power of the legend lies in its resonance with a deep, almost instinctual human memory of catastrophe and lost greatness. The Piri Reis map injects a new kind of evidence into this ancient conversation. It provides a data point, a set of measurable geographic coordinates that seem to confirm a world older and more knowledgeable than our records allow. It asks us to consider whether myths are sometimes born from truth, whether the stories our ancestors told around fires were not just fables, but faint echoes of a real world that vanished beneath the ice and waves. If the map is a relic, however indirect, of an Atlantean era, then its lines are not just ink. They are a message in a bottle cast across 12,000 years, telling us that someone, long before the pyramids were built, looked upon the true shape of the Earth and dared to draw it. Atlantis offers a compelling narrative, but what if the truth is both more grounded and more astonishing? Another possibility emerges, one that requires no sunken continents or philosophical allegories, but simply a forgotten chapter in the long story of humanity itself. Imagine for a moment the world not 12,000 years ago, but 20,000. This was the peak of the last ice age. Vast sheets of ice covered much of Europe and North America, locking away enormous volumes of water. Because of this, global sea levels were over 300 feet lower than they are today. Coastlines looked utterly different. What are now shallow seas were dry, habitable land. Entire continental shelves, like the vast plains known as Doggerland that connected Britain to Europe, were above water, teeming with life and potentially with people. This dramatic change in geography opens a door. During this epoch, a sophisticated maritime culture could have flourished along these now drowned coastlines. With advanced shipbuilding skills born from necessity and a deep understanding of celestial navigation to traverse these newly exposed seaways, they could have embarked on voyages of exploration that seem impossible to our modern timeline. They would have mapped shorelines that are now hundreds of feet underwater, charting a world that vanished as the ice melted and the seas rose. The maps they created, showing the true contours of continents during an ice age, would have depicted lands in shapes we would not recognize today. When these maps were copied millennia later by cultures who no longer understood the original context, the coastlines might have been misinterpreted, grafted onto the wrong parts of the world, or labeled as mysterious southern lands. This theory elegantly sidesteps the need for a mythical Atlantis. Instead, it proposes a real historical civilization, one that achieved a level of social complexity and technological prowess far earlier than our textbooks suggest. And intriguingly, modern archaeology is beginning to find whispers of such a forgotten age. Take the site of Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Discovered in the 1990s, This monumental complex of carved stone pillars arranged in circles dates back an astounding 11,600 years. That is 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. The builders were not settled farmers but likely hunter-gatherers, yet the scale, precision, and clear symbolic complexity of the site shatter the old narrative that monument building required agriculture and cities. Göbekli Tepe stands as a stark, stone testament to a level of social organization and abstract thought in a period we once considered primitive. If people could coordinate to build such a structure, what else were they capable of? Could they have also mastered the seas? Other clues lie beneath the waves. Off the coast of Gujarat, India, lies the submerged city of Dwarka, a site associated with ancient legends. While the dating is debated, marine archaeology has revealed massive stone structures, anchors, and pottery at depths that confirm a prosperous port city was swallowed by the rising ocean. Similarly, off the southern coast of Japan, the mysterious Yonaguni monument presents a series of immense, terraced stone formations with sharp edges and right angles, lying 100 feet below the surface. Geologists argue whether it is natural or partly shaped by human hands, but its location on a submerged landmass that was above water at the end of the last ice age is provocative. These underwater sites are not necessarily proof of a global ice age civilization, but they are evidence of a profound truth. Our current map of human history is missing its coastal chapters. The most habitable, resource-rich areas for early humans would have been these now drowned continental shelves. When the ice melted in a relatively rapid period around 12,000 years ago, the seas rose not in a slow creep, but in catastrophic surges as massive glacial lakes broke their ice dams. Such events could have erased entire cultures in a generation, preserving only their most inland or high-altitude structures like Göbekli Tepe, and scattering survivors who carried fragmented memories and perhaps precious maps to higher ground. This scenario provides a perfectly rational, geological basis for the Piri Reis enigma. An advanced maritime network during the Ice Age creates precise charts of a world with lower sea levels and different coastlines. Their civilization is fragmented and drowned by the Great Melt. Their maps, however, survive as prized artifacts, copied and recopied by later Bronze Age societies, then classical scholars, then Arab geographers, and finally an Ottoman admiral. The mysterious southern continent on the parchment, then, might not be Antarctica displaced, but a misunderstood rendering of a real coastline from that lost world, a shoreline that has been underwater for millennia. This theory asks us to look at the map not as a snapshot of 30 million years ago, but of 12,000. It suggests the impossible knowledge it contains is not pre-human, but profoundly human, a legacy from our own ancestors who explored the planet during an age of ice, and whose greatest achievements now rest silently on the ocean floor. But the Ice Age civilization theory, while compelling, still requires a leap across thousands of unrecorded years. To find a more tangible link in the chain, we must look at a known historical tradition, one that Piri Reis himself would have been intimately familiar with. This is the world of the Portolan chart. Emerging in the late 13th century in the Mediterranean, these were not decorative world maps for scholars. They were practical, no-nonsense navigational tools drawn on vellum by and for sailors. Their defining feature was a web of room lines radiating from central compass roses like a spider's web, allowing a navigator to plot a straight course between any two ports. What is immediately striking about them is their stunning accuracy. The coastlines of the Mediterranean, the Adriatic, and the Black Sea are rendered with a precision that seems to appear out of nowhere, fully formed with no crude predecessors. Historians of cartography are openly puzzled by their origin. It is as if someone simply handed the medieval mariners a perfectly correct map of the inland sea and said, "Here, use this." The Portolan charts represent a corpus of practical, empirically derived geographic knowledge that was clearly preserved and passed down among seafaring communities, entirely separate from the more theoretical and often fanciful world maps of the time. Piri Reis was an admiral of the Ottoman Navy. He would have used, studied, and likely owned many such Portolan charts. In his notes on his famous world map, he explicitly states he consulted charts of the Mediterranean and the Indian Seas drawn by Arab and Portuguese sailors, which were essentially Portolan. This provides a direct, conventional pipeline for much of the data on his map, especially for the well-traveled regions. The accurate depiction of the Atlantic islands, the bulge of West Africa, and even parts of the New World could have come from these recent sailing charts, compiled from the voyages of explorers like Columbus and da Gama. This is the comfortable, academic explanation for a large portion of the map's content. It grounds the artifact firmly in its time, showing Piri Reis as a master synthesizer of the best contemporary navigational data available. But the comfort of this explanation begins to fray when we look closer. The Portolan tradition itself is a mystery. Where did its initial, remarkable accuracy come from? Some researchers, like the historian Charles Hapgood, proposed that the first Portolan charts were not original medieval creations at all, but were themselves copies of far older source maps. Imagine a Roman or even a Phoenician sea chart preserved in a monastery or an Arab library, its coastlines meticulously copied and recopied over centuries. With each copy, the original context is lost. The room lines are added as a new navigational aid, but the underlying shape of the coast remains stubbornly, accurately intact. This idea transforms the Portolan from a dead end into a potential bridge. It becomes a vessel, a carrier of ancient geographic data that survived the collapse of classical antiquity, passed hand to hand through the Islamic Golden Age where it was refined with astronomical knowledge, and finally delivered to the Renaissance mariners. In this light, Piri Reis's work is not the beginning of something new, but the magnificent culmination of a data stream thousands of years old. He combined the ancient, preserved coastlines from the Portolan tradition with the new, eyewitness reports from the Age of Discovery. And somewhere in that mix, perhaps from a particularly old and anomalous Portolan chart of the Southern Ocean, he included a fragment that didn't belong to any contemporary report, a coastline from a different age entirely. This perspective allows for a fascinating synthesis. It doesn't dismiss the map as pure fantasy, nor does it require a single lost civilization. Instead, it paints a picture of human knowledge as a flickering flame, sometimes burning bright, often guttering low, but never fully extinguished. Geographic facts once hard-won by some ancient explorer could become embedded in a chart, copied and used for practical purposes long after their origin was forgotten. The Portolan charts show us that precise cartography can persist as a craft, even when the science behind it is no longer understood. So the Piri Reis map sits at a crossroads. It is undeniably a product of its immediate medieval and Renaissance context, fed by the Portolan pipeline. Yet, the extraordinary anomalies it contains suggest that pipeline was fed by springs much, much farther up the mountain of time. The charts he used were not just records of recent voyages, they were libraries holding within their precise lines the silent, uncredited testimony of forgotten mariners from epochs the world had long since left behind. 18 years after Piri Reis completed his work, another cartographer produced a map that seems to confirm the impossible. In 1531, the French mathematician and cosmographer Oronce Finé published a world map of his own. At its southern extreme, he drew a massive, detailed landmass labeled Terra Australis. Unlike the suggestive coastline on the Ottoman map, Phineas's depiction is startlingly explicit. It shows a continent with a distinct, indented coastline, a central mountain range, and what appear to be rivers flowing from its interior toward the sea. The shape is unmistakable to a modern eye. It is a recognizable, if somewhat squashed, representation of Antarctica. More critically, it shows the continent not as a frozen wasteland, but as a land that could support flowing water and complex topography. This was not a vague southern blob, it was a specific geographical portrait. The existence of this second map, created independently just a few years later, changes the entire nature of the mystery. One anomalous map could be dismissed as a coincidence, a lucky guess, or a misunderstood fragment. But two detailed maps from different corners of the Renaissance world, both showing the same impossible continent, suggest something far more significant. They point toward a common source. When scholars place the Phineas map beside modern reconstructions of Antarctica's subglacial topography, the correlations become difficult to ignore. The central mountain range he depicted aligns with the Transantarctic Mountains, the massive chain that divides the continent. The large bay on the right side of his landmass corresponds closely to the Ross Sea. The overall proportions, while compressed, maintain a relational accuracy that feels intentional. It is as if Phineas was working from a source map that showed the continent in full, but he was forced to fit its enormous scale onto a smaller parchment, distorting the dimensions but preserving the key features. Comparing the two Renaissance maps reveals both a pattern and a puzzle. Piri Reis showed a fragment of the northern coastline with startling fidelity to the bedrock. Oronce's Phineas presented a fuller, more recognizable outline of the entire continent, but with less precise coastal detail. They are different views of the same hidden truth, like two artists sketching the same statue from opposite sides. This divergence actually strengthens the case for ancient source material. If both men were simply inventing a southern continent based on myth, their depictions would likely be more similar, following the same fashionable cartographic tropes of the era. Instead, they show different aspects and levels of detail, which is exactly what you would expect if each had access to different pages from the same lost atlas, or copied from intermediary charts that had each preserved different fragments of the original survey. The Phineas map moves the discussion from a solitary enigma to a corroborated anomaly. It transforms a question about a single admiral's sources into evidence of a wider, more persistent tradition. This was not just Piri Reis's secret. It was a piece of knowledge that had survived in some form, in the libraries and scholarly networks of Europe as well. The fact that a French academic could produce such a map indicates this geographic data had infiltrated the highest levels of Renaissance learning. It suggests that the ancient charts referenced by Piri Reis were not unique to Istanbul, but were part of a scattered, international corpus of forgotten knowledge that predated the Ice Age. Two maps drawn a generation apart now point back to the same vanished world. The thread of this impossible knowledge did not end with Piri Reis or Oronce's Phineas. It wove its way directly into the foundation of modern cartography itself. In the year 1569, the Flemish geographer Gerardus Mercator published his revolutionary world map, the one that introduced the famous Mercator projection, which allowed sailors to plot straight-line courses across the curved Earth. There, on his meticulously calculated chart, nestled at the bottom, was the same haunting feature, a detailed southern continent. Mercator's depiction was even more refined, showing a landmass divided by narrow straits into several large regions, with notations of mountains and rivers. This was not a casual addition. Mercator was a consummate scholar, a man who built his maps from a painstaking synthesis of mathematics, astronomy, and every source document he could acquire. In his own writings, he explicitly stated that for his representation of the southern lands, he relied on ancient authorities. He cited a specific source, a map he believed dated from the Roman era, a tangible artifact from classical antiquity that supposedly showed this terra incognita. This citation is the critical link. It creates a clear, documented chain of custody for this anomalous geographic data. First, Piri Reis in 1513, compiling from charts he said were ancient. Then Oronce Finé in 1531, presenting a full continental outline. And finally, Gerardus Mercator in 1569, the greatest mapmaker of his age, formally attributing his southern continent to a specific Roman map. These were not fringe figures. They were the leading cartographic minds of the Renaissance, separated by decades and geography, yet all converging on the same inexplicable conclusion. They were not copying each other, they were independently accessing and trusting the same stream of lost information. This pattern suggests something profound, the persistent existence of a master map, or more likely a set of master maps that survived the collapse of the ancient world. Imagine a single, extraordinarily accurate world survey, perhaps engraved on a bronze tablet or painted on a durable scroll. As the library that housed it burned or was scattered, copies were made, fragments were traded. One copy might have made its way to Constantinople, where a scholar translated its Greek labels into Arabic. Another might have been carried to a monastery in Europe, where a monk carefully traced its coastlines onto vellum. Over centuries, these copies became the source charts, growing worn and fragmented, their origins fading into legend. Yet their core geographic data, the shape of a continent that should not have been known, remained stubbornly intact, passed from hand to hand like a sacred relic. The fact that Mercator, a scientist of immense rigor, considered this Roman source credible enough to include on his defining work tells us everything. To him, it was not a myth, it was a piece of historical data, a puzzle piece from a past that knew more about the world than his own century did. He was not drawing fantasy, he was attempting to reconstruct a lost geography from the fragments available to him. This transforms the mystery from a cartographic oddity into a historical detective story. We are not looking for a single mistake, we are tracing the ghostly outline of a vanished library, a corpus of knowledge that the smartest minds of the Renaissance could see existed, even if they could no longer explain where it came from or how its creators saw a world hidden under ice and time. The 20th century brought a new kind of eye to the mystery, one that could see through ice and across time. As satellite technology and advanced geophysics matured, scientists could finally create a definitive map of what Antarctica truly looked like beneath its frozen shroud. This was no longer guesswork, it was hard data, a sonogram of the continent's skeleton. In the 1990s, a team of researchers led by cartographers at the United States Air Force took a bold step. They took the Piri Reis map, scanned it, and using computer software, stretched its unique projection to fit a modern polar coordinate grid. Then, they laid this corrected image over the newly minted satellite and seismic maps of the subglacial bedrock. The result was not a vague resemblance, it was a series of chillingly precise overlaps. The distinctive finger of land curling up from the map's southern continent aligned almost perfectly with the Pommer Peninsula, a major feature of Antarctica that points toward South America. The large bay on the right side of the Piri Reis landmass corresponded with the exact location and scale of the Ross Sea, a massive indentation in the coastline. Even the placement of certain topographical features, like the suggestion of mountain ranges inland, matched the known subglacial highlands that ring the continent's interior. The match was far too specific to be dismissed as artistic license. An artist inventing a mythical southern land would likely draw smooth, generic curves or dramatic, jagged cliffs. The Piri Reis map, however, shows a coastline with a particular complex geometry, a series of peninsulas, inlets, and bays that mirror the actual, hidden coastline with an accuracy that feels intentional. This technical analysis removed the mystery from the realm of speculation and placed it firmly in the realm of measurable data. The question was no longer whether the map looked like Antarctica, but how it could possibly contain data that matched the bedrock so closely. The satellite comparison provided the strongest empirical argument yet that the map was not a depiction of a theoretical land, but a corrupted copy of a survey of a real one. This forced a confrontation with the evidence. We could no longer talk about myths or Renaissance errors. We had to talk about information that had been placed on parchment centuries before the technology existed to verify it. The lines on that 500-year-old document were now in silent, digital conversation with satellites orbiting the Earth, and they were telling the same impossible story. This alignment is the core of the enigma, a geometric fact that stands regardless of how we choose to interpret it. It compels us to ask, if this is not Antarctica, what is it? And if it is Antarctica, how did its cartographer see through a mile of solid ice? This map does something more profound than simply challenge a date in a textbook. It touches a nerve deep within the human psyche, a place where wonder and unease meet. Among countless historical puzzles, the Piri Reis anomaly holds a unique power to captivate because it speaks directly to our most fundamental questions about who we are and where we came from. It confronts us with the possibility of a profound emptiness in our collective memory. We are raised on a story of linear progress, a steady climb from simple hunter-gatherers to the complex technological civilization we inhabit today. This map, with its impossible coastline, introduces a jarring alternative, a narrative of peaks and valleys. It whispers that perhaps there were other summits of human achievement, other epochs where knowledge soared to heights we can barely comprehend, only to be lost in some great forgetting. This is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is an emotional one. It makes our entire history feel suddenly fragile, like a book missing its first several chapters, where we have been reading from the middle without ever knowing how the story truly began. The idea resonates because it mirrors our own personal experiences of loss and rediscovery. We have all had the feeling of a forgotten name on the tip of our tongue, or stumbled upon an old family heirloom whose story has been lost. The Piri Reis map is that feeling, but projected onto the canvas of all human history, a forgotten heirloom of the entire species. It invites us to question the very ground beneath our feet, not geologically but historically. What if the layers of the past are not just physical strata of rock and sediment, but layers of lost cultures and erased wisdom? This taps into a universal curiosity about origins, a deep-seated need to understand our place in the long chain of time. The map suggests the chain might have links we never dreamed existed, forged by hands we cannot name. This transforms the mystery from a cartographic problem into a philosophical one. It forces us to confront the fragility of knowledge itself. Everything we know is built on what has been preserved, on scrolls that survived fires, on stories passed down through generations. The Piri Reis fragment is a stark reminder of how much can slip through the cracks. It represents the haunting possibility of a great library that burned, leaving behind only a single, charred page whose contents we struggle to read. That is why this 500-year-old parchment feels so urgent, so modern. In an age of information overload where data feels permanent and accessible, the map tells a cautionary tale. It suggests that civilizations, no matter how advanced, are not immune to being reset, their greatest insights dissolving into myth and legend. The true power of this mystery is not that it provides answers, but that it reopens a door we thought was permanently sealed, a door to a past that might have been far more vast, more mysterious, and more humbling than our recorded history dares to admit. It asks us to look at the blank spaces on our historical maps and wonder what truly belongs there. The map's undeniable allure has also made it a magnet for grander, less grounded narratives. In the decades since its rediscovery, the Piri Reis artifact has been enlisted to support a wide array of speculative theories, from ancient astronauts providing technology to lost civilizations, to hyper-diffusionist models where a single superculture seeded all global knowledge. These stories are compelling, often weaving the map into a tapestry of other archaeological outliers to paint a picture of history utterly alien to the academic mainstream. It is crucial, however, to draw a clear line between the map's legitimate, measurable anomalies and the unsupported leaps of imagination that often follow. The coastline's correlation with subglacial topography is a factual geometric puzzle. Claiming it as proof of extraterrestrial visitation is not. This distinction is the heart of critical thinking when faced with historical mysteries. Extraordinary claims do, indeed, require extraordinary evidence. A single enigmatic map, no matter how baffling, remains just that, a single piece of data. It is an outlier, a question mark in the margin of history's text, not the entire rewritten textbook itself. This is not to dismiss the mystery or its profound implications, but to ground our exploration in intellectual honesty. The map invites skepticism in two directions: skepticism of the conventional timeline it challenges, and equal skepticism of the more sensational explanations offered in its name. Valuing the artifact means engaging with its actual characteristics, its documented history, and the genuine scientific debates it sparks, rather than using it as a mere prop for preconceived narratives. This balanced perspective is our most important tool. It allows us to hold two thoughts at once, to acknowledge that the Piri Reis map presents a legitimate historical problem that deserves serious inquiry, while also recognizing that the solution may be more complex or perhaps more mundane than the most dramatic stories suggest. The map does not need aliens or Atlanteans to be revolutionary. Its very existence, with its precise and impossible data, is revolutionary enough. Our task is to follow the evidence where it leads, not where we wish it to go, maintaining a sense of wonder tethered to a respect for rigorous inquiry. For in that disciplined space between known and unknown, the most profound discoveries are often waiting. The most persistent and academically grounded alternative is that the mapmaker was not looking south toward a frozen continent, but east across the Atlantic. Some cartographic historians argue that the controversial landmass is not Antarctica at all, but a distorted and misunderstood rendering of the eastern coastline of South America, specifically the region of Brazil. According to this view, Piri Reis was working with early, fragmentary reports from Portuguese explorers who had only recently begun charting this new world. In the chaos of translating sailor stories into drawn lines, features could have been stretched, duplicated, or entirely invented to fill the vast unknown spaces on the parchment. This theory places the map firmly within the known context of its time, a product of the messy, exhilarating dawn of global exploration. To evaluate this, we must look at the geography. The northernmost tip of the map's mystery land curves eastward, a shape that could be interpreted as the bulge of Brazil. Proponents suggest that what appears to be a separate southern continent is actually a second, erroneous drawing of the same South American coastline, a common cartographic error of the era where new data was grafted onto old frameworks in confusing ways. They point to the map's own labels, which mention parrots and hot climates, details far more consistent with tropical Brazil than a polar wilderness. This interpretation seeks to solve the mystery by removing the need for any impossible ancient knowledge, attributing the anomaly to the ordinary human processes of misunderstanding and myth-making. Yet, even this conventional explanation requires us to accept a series of significant cartographic liberties. When we compare the shape on the Piri Reis map to a modern bathymetric chart, which shows the underwater continental shelf, the fit is not convincing. The shelf of eastern South America extends in a relatively smooth, gradual curve. The landmass on the Ottoman map, however, presents a sharply defined coastline with distinct peninsulas, deep bays, and a tapered shape that mirrors the Antarctic Peninsula, a feature utterly absent from the South American profile. To get from one to the other, a mapmaker would have had to not just distort the coastline, but fundamentally reimagine its geometry, breaking it into new forms for which there were no sailor reports. Furthermore, the orientation is problematic. The map clearly shows this land lying essentially due south of the Atlantic Ocean, separated from South America by a distinct body of water. If it were meant to be Brazil, it is placed in the wrong location relative to Africa and is drawn with a topography that does not match the actual continent. This mainstream position, while intellectually careful, ultimately asks us to believe in a different kind of coincidence, that a Renaissance cartographer's series of mistakes accidentally produced a coastline that would, centuries later, be found to match a hidden continent thousands of miles away with uncanny topological precision. The scholarly debate thus presents a stark choice. Do we accept an extraordinary cartographic error or an extraordinary historical revelation? Both paths lead to a sense of profound wonder at how a single piece of parchment can so stubbornly resist a simple explanation. The debate over the map's origins forces us to confront the Earth's own volatile biography. Paleoclimatology, the science of ancient climates, reveals a planet in constant flux. Long before humans, the world experienced epochs where polar ice caps vanished entirely, and lush forests grew in regions that are now frozen deserts. Could the Piri Reis map be a ghost from one of those long-lost worlds? Scientific data from ice cores and ocean sediment tells a clear story. There have been several extended periods in Earth's deep history, like the Eocene, roughly 50 million years ago, when atmospheric carbon dioxide levels were much higher and global temperatures were so warm that Antarctica hosted temperate rainforests. Crocodiles basked on its shores and mammals thrived in its river valleys. This was a planet unrecognizable to us. The continent was not at the South Pole in its current orientation, but part of a larger landmass called Gondwana, slowly drifting toward its present position. As it moved south and the global climate cooled, the ice began to form, gradually entombing that verdant landscape under a sheet miles thick. The last time any significant portion of Antarctica could have been considered ice-free, with coastlines resembling the map, was many millions of years before the first primates evolved. This scientific timeline creates an insurmountable barrier for conventional history. It means if the map is a genuine depiction, the knowledge it encodes isn't just ancient in human terms. It is pre-human, a relic from an age when our ancestors were small, furry creatures scurrying beneath prehistoric canopies. The idea that any oral tradition or written record could survive across tens of millions of years, through multiple ice ages and continental shifts, seems not just unlikely but utterly fantastical. It would require a continuity of culture and record-keeping that defies every model we have for the lifespan of civilizations or even species. This perspective, grounded in hard climate science, seems to decisively shut the door on the mystery, labeling it an intriguing but impossible coincidence. Yet the stubborn accuracy of the coastline remains, a splinter in the mind that refuses to be dismissed. This forces a different, more philosophical question. What are the absolute limits of how knowledge can be preserved? We think in terms of libraries and scrolls, stories passed from parent to child. But what if data could be encoded in other, more durable ways? Could the layout of a sacred site or the alignment of megalithic stones preserve a star chart or a map across millennia, even if the original meaning was lost? This is where hard science and soft history have their most fascinating collision. Paleoclimatology gives us the when, the immutable timeline of the Earth. The anomalous map gives us the what, a precise geographic snapshot. Bridging the incomprehensible gap between them requires a mechanism for transmission we have not yet discovered or perhaps even conceived. It pushes us to consider whether our understanding of history is not just missing chapters, but entire volumes written in a language we have forgotten how to read. The map then becomes a test. It asks whether we privilege the scientific model of deep time to the point of ignoring a tangible artifact, or whether we allow the artifact to challenge our assumptions about how deep time itself might be recorded. Perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one over the other, but in sitting with the profound discomfort of the disconnect, acknowledging that some mysteries exist to stretch the very boundaries of how we think about time, memory, and the resilience of information itself. After its dramatic rediscovery, the map's own story was just beginning. This delicate piece of gazelle skin, having survived centuries of obscurity in an imperial palace, now faced a new and perilous journey through the 20th century. It was carefully transferred to the Topkapi Palace Museum Library in Istanbul, where it remains to this day, preserved under strict conditions as one of Turkey's most prized historical artifacts. Its fragility is a constant concern, the ink and vellum vulnerable to light, humidity, and the simple passage of time. Each scholarly examination is a careful negotiation with permanence, a reminder that we are studying an object as mortal as the mysteries it contains. The map is rarely displayed to the public, its image living on through high-quality photographic reproductions that have allowed researchers across the globe to scrutinize its every line without risking the original. These facsimiles have fueled the international debate, spreading the enigma from Istanbul to universities in Europe and America, turning a single artifact into a shared global puzzle. Yet, this very act of preservation and study is layered with modern meaning. In Turkey, the Piri Reis map is a powerful symbol of national heritage and historical ingenuity, a testament to the Ottoman Empire's engagement with science and exploration at the dawn of the modern age. It is celebrated as a landmark of Turkish cartography, a point of immense cultural pride. This national narrative sometimes sits uneasily beside the map's more speculative, world-altering implications. The artifact has been enlisted in various stories, from patriotic tales of Ottoman brilliance to broader, more universalist theories about a lost human past. Its journey from a forgotten scroll to a protected treasure mirrors our own evolving relationship with history, a shift from neglect to reverence, and from simple classification to profound questioning. This physical object, this skin scraped clean and inscribed with impossible lines, has survived the fall of empires, the tumult of world wars, and the neglect of dusty archives. It now rests in a climate-controlled case, a silent witness from 1513, connecting our hands through glass and time to the hand of an admiral who dared to copy a world he could not possibly know. We are left holding one end of a thread that stretches back into a darkness so deep we cannot see its origin, left to wonder if the hand that first drew these lines was even human at all. The threads of this mystery extend far beyond a single parchment. If we listen closely to the oldest stories humanity has ever told, we hear the same haunting refrain echoing across continents and cultures. From the Epic of Gilgamesh in ancient Mesopotamia to the Aboriginal songlines of Australia, from the flood narrative in the Hebrew Bible to the tales of the Maya Popol Vuh, a common memory persists, a memory of a great deluge. These are not just stories of heavy rain, but of a world-altering cataclysm, a rising of the waters that swept away a former age and its people. Often, these myths speak of something more, of a lost golden age or a civilization that possessed great knowledge before the waves took it. The Sumerians wrote of Ziusudra, warned by the gods to build a boat. The Greeks told of Deucalion and Pirha, repopulating the earth after the flood. Hindu texts describe Manu saved by a giant fish. The consistency is staggering, a global chorus singing of a traumatic reset. Scholars often interpret these as localized flood events, the terrifying but natural overflowing of a great river like the Tigris or the Yellow River, magnified into myth over generations. But what if the chorus is remembering something far larger? What if these stories are the cultural fingerprints of a real, global catastrophe, a rapid rise in sea levels so devastating it was seared into the collective memory of every surviving human community. This is where our map re-enters the conversation, not as a lone anomaly, but as a potential piece of evidence in this oldest of human stories. If those ancient source maps Piri Reis copied from did indeed depict coastlines from a world before the Great Melt, then they are cartographic fossils of that lost epoch. The myths give us the emotional narrative, the trauma of the event passed down through story. The map offers something else entirely, a technical document, a cold, precise sketch of the geography that was lost. One is the heart of the memory, the other is its blueprint. Together, they suggest that the flood myths are not mere allegory. They could be the inherited trauma of a real historical event, the rapid inundation of coastal lands at the end of the last ice age, an event that drowned the homelands of early advanced cultures and scattered their survivors. Those survivors would have carried with them not just stories of the disaster, but precious fragments of the knowledge their culture possessed, including perhaps maps. Over millennia, the stories became sacred lore, while the maps, copied and recopied, lost their context but kept their shape. The Piri Reis fragment, then, becomes more than a curiosity. It transforms into a potential artifact from the very world those global myths lament, a tangible, measurable relic that whispers, the stories are true. There was a great loss. This is what was taken from us. This connection does not prove the existence of a single global civilization like Atlantis, but it powerfully suggests that the cataclysm that birthed our flood myths was real, and that it erased not just people, but the sophisticated knowledge of those who lived on the now drowned shores. Our oldest stories and this enigmatic map may be two halves of the same forgotten truth, waiting to be joined. The coastline on the parchment is one thing, but the method behind it is another mystery entirely. To create a map with such apparent accuracy, especially of a landmass separated by vast oceans, its original surveyors would have needed to solve the single greatest technical puzzle in the history of navigation, the problem of longitude. For centuries, sailors could determine their north-south position, their latitude, by measuring the angle of the sun or the North Star. But knowing your east-west position, your longitude, was a nightmare. It required knowing the precise time difference between your location and a fixed starting point like Greenwich. A mistake of just 4 minutes could put you 60 miles off course. This challenge was so immense that in 1714, the British government offered a massive prize, equivalent to millions of dollars today, to anyone who could solve it. The solution finally came with the invention of an incredibly precise marine chronometer by John Harrison in the 1760s, so we face a staggering implication. If the source maps for Piri Reis contain real geographic data of a distant continent, then the civilization that created them possessed a reliable method for determining longitude over 1,000 years before Harrison's clock, and perhaps millennia before that. This forces a profound technological question. How did they do it? We must speculate on possibilities rooted not in fantasy, but in the potential limits of human ingenuity. Perhaps they used an advanced and sustained program of celestial observation, tracking the slow precession of the stars or the timing of lunar eclipses from fixed observatories across the globe, building a mathematical model of the Earth's movements so precise it allowed for global triangulation. Maybe they mastered spherical trigonometry to a degree lost in the Dark Ages, understanding how to project the curved surface of the planet onto a flat grid with a sophistication that would not be matched until the Renaissance. Or perhaps they employed a method we have not yet considered, a form of global positioning that did not rely on precise timekeeping as we know it, but on some other natural constant or geometric principle forgotten to time. This line of thinking is not about attributing the work to outside forces, but about humbly reconsidering the peaks and valleys of human discovery. Our modern timeline of technological progress is a straight, upward line, but history is rarely so neat. We know of the Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device considered the world's first analog computer, capable of predicting astronomical positions. Its existence alone proves that complex technical knowledge could arise, be concentrated in a specific place and time, and then vanish for over a millennium. What other marvels of practical science, of geodetic survey, might have risen and fallen in the deep past? The technological implication of the map is a direct challenge to our chronological arrogance. It asks us to consider that the brilliant minds of the 18th century were not the first to unlock this secret, but were simply the ones who rediscovered it. What other foundational pieces of our modern world, from mathematics to medicine, might have ancient precedents lying buried, not in the ground, but in the fragmented pages of our own forgotten history? This shifts the mystery from what they knew to how they could have possibly known it, opening a door to a past that might have been far more technically luminous than we have ever allowed ourselves to believe. But this search for lost knowledge inevitably leads us to a modern and deeply human dilemma. If the lines on this map were ever proven to point to a forgotten civilization, a question of profound consequence would arise: who does that history belong to? The discovery of a precursor culture, one that potentially surveyed the entire globe, would not exist in a historical vacuum. It would ripple through the present, challenging the foundational narratives of every civilization that came after. For nations and peoples whose identity is built upon being first, or being the originators of great knowledge, such a revelation could feel like a displacement. It touches on the ongoing, global conversation about decolonizing history, about questioning who gets to write the story of the past and whose achievements are centered in that story. The Piri Reis map itself is a perfect emblem of this complexity. It is an Ottoman artifact held in Turkey, drawn by an admiral of the Islamic world. Yet it claims to compile sources from the age of Alexander the Great, from Arab scholars, and perhaps from even more ancient hands, and the knowledge it may encode points to a geography that belongs to no modern nation, a continent that is a shared inheritance of all humanity. This single piece of parchment weaves together Turkish, Greek, Arab, and potentially prehistoric legacy into one inseparable whole. It becomes a symbol that history is not a simple, linear property owned by one culture after another. It is a tangled, interconnected tapestry where threads from countless forgotten looms are woven together, often in ways we can no longer disentangle. To unravel this mystery, then, is not just an academic exercise. It is an act that forces us to reconsider the very idea of ownership when it comes to the past. Does a breakthrough about human origins belong only to the country where the artifact is stored, or to the global community seeking understanding? If a lost civilization influenced later cultures, does that diminish those later achievements, or does it simply reveal the long, collaborative journey of human ingenuity? These are not abstract questions. They live at the heart of museum debates over repatriation of artifacts, and in the efforts of indigenous communities to have their oral histories recognized as valid records. The map reminds us that when we dig into ancient mysteries, we are not just digging for facts, we are digging for meaning, and that meaning can reshape how modern societies see their own place in the long story of the world. It asks us to approach the past not as territory to be claimed, but as a shared landscape to be explored with humility, recognizing that every culture sits atop layers of history they did not make, and holds fragments of stories that began long before them. The quest for this map's truth is not over, it is simply waiting for the next discovery. So what kind of evidence could finally solve this centuries-old riddle? The most definitive proof would be the miraculous discovery of one of the source maps Piri Reis himself cited. Imagine a team of archaeologists, perhaps in a sealed section of an old monastery library or a forgotten Ottoman archive, unrolling a much older piece of vellum. This document would show the same southern coastline with even greater clarity, perhaps with annotations in a lost language, confirming its origin and age. While such a find seems like fantasy, history has taught us that priceless manuscripts do still emerge from obscurity, offering tangible links to the past we thought were gone forever. Another avenue lies beneath the waves or ice. Unambiguous archaeological evidence of a prehistoric global seafaring culture would transform the debate. This would not be a single, ambiguous artifact, but a network of discoveries, perhaps the remains of advanced harbor works on now submerged coastlines, or distinctive tool technology found on continents separated by vast oceans, dated to the same remote epoch. Such findings would prove that long-distance maritime exploration was not only possible but practiced on a scale that could produce accurate world maps. They would provide the civilization that the Piri Reis fragment seems to imply must have existed. New geological discoveries could also reshape the timeline. While current science places Antarctica's last ice-free period millions of years in the past, our understanding of Earth's climate history is constantly being refined. What if future research into sediment cores or bedrock analysis revealed evidence of a much more recent, localized temperate phase along the continent's northern coasts, a brief window within the last few 100,000 years? Such a finding, while still ancient, would dramatically narrow the impossible gap between the map's data and potential human observers. Even the map itself may hold untapped clues. Advances in material science could allow for more sophisticated analysis of the ink pigments and the animal skin vellum. By studying trace elements or isotopic signatures, researchers might pinpoint the geographical origins of the materials with greater precision, potentially linking them to specific historical trade routes or even suggesting the map is a composite of parchments from different times and places. High-resolution spectral imaging might reveal faded underdrawings or erased annotations, ghost notes from the cartographer's process that hint at his sources. This shifts our perspective from passive mystery to active mission. The story of the Piri Reis map is no longer just about what we have lost, but about what we might still find. It outlines an ongoing quest that belongs to historians, archaeologists, geologists, and even curious observers around the world. The next chapter could be written by a scholar in a dusty archive, a scientist drilling into Antarctic ice, or a diver exploring a submerged plateau. It invites us all to become part of the investigation, to keep our minds open and our eyes on the horizon for the next clue that could turn an enduring enigma into a solved piece of our profound human story. The Piri Reis map has long since escaped the confines of the archive to live a second life in our collective imagination. You can find its distinctive shape not just in history books, but leaping from the pages of best-selling speculative works, flashing across television screens, and embedded in the code of popular video games. Authors like Graham Hancock have centered the map in narratives of a lost, advanced Ice Age civilization, while Erich von Däniken has cited it as potential evidence of otherworldly visitors in the distant past. On television, it is a recurring star on programs exploring ancient mysteries, where its impossible coastline is presented as a puzzle piece in a grand, hidden history. This journey from scholarly debate to pop culture icon reveals something crucial about its power. The map is the perfect what-if artifact. It provides a single, tangible data point, a real object in a real museum that seems to openly defy the official story. For a storyteller, that is pure creative fuel. It is a door, and it is already slightly ajar, inviting narratives to push it fully open and explore the worlds that might lie beyond. In a video game or novel, the map can become a literal treasure map, leading characters to the ruins of a forgotten precursor culture, or to a revelation that reshapes their understanding of reality. Its appeal lies in this elegant simplicity. It is a key that seems to fit a lock we have not yet found, By anchoring wild speculation to a physical relic, these stories gain a sheen of plausibility that pure fantasy lacks. The public's fascination is not with the dry details of cartographic projection, but with the profound emotional question the map implies: what if we are wrong about everything? This cultural footprint demonstrates how the mystery has transcended any academic resolution. For millions, the Piri Reis map is no longer a question for historians. It is a symbol, a shorthand for the idea that our past is far deeper and more mysterious than we've been taught. It fuels a widespread and enduring desire for a past that contains grander narratives than simple linear progress, a past punctuated by forgotten cataclysms and lost epochs of genius. In this way, the map performs a unique cultural function. It keeps the door to wonder propped open, ensuring that each new generation can look at that 500-year-old parchment and ask, what if? Perhaps the greatest lesson of this parchment is not about geography, but about our own minds. The Piri Reis map, regardless of where its lines truly lead, stands as a permanent monument to humility. It confronts us with a simple, unsettling fact: our current understanding of history is always a draft, a story being rewritten with every new artifact pulled from the earth or deciphered from a forgotten text. We build grand narratives, confident timelines that march neatly from ancient to modern, and then a single piece of gazelle skin appears, covered in ink that should not exist, and the entire structure suddenly feels fragile. This is not a failure of science, but its very essence. True progress in understanding our past does not come from clinging to dogma, but from the willingness to be surprised. The map is that surprise made physical. It whispers that the past is not a tidy shelf of labeled events, but a vast, dark ocean. We have only explored its sunlit surface, while beneath lie depths and currents we have not yet begun to fathom. The confident chapters in our textbooks are often simplified summaries, necessary for learning, but they can never capture the full, chaotic, and mysterious complexity of what actually happened. Every generation makes its peace with the past based on the evidence it has, and that evidence is always incomplete. Think of how our view of the dinosaurs transformed from slow, lumbering reptiles to dynamic, feathered creatures, all because of new fossils. Or how the discovery of Göbekli Tepe forced us to rethink the very origins of civilization. History, like science, is not a set of answers, but a method of asking better questions. The Piri Reis map is one of the best questions we have ever been asked. It does not demand that we believe in lost continents or ancient astronauts. It simply demands that we stay curious. It encourages that vital, childlike sense of wonder when faced with something that does not fit, and the courage to question the established story. That willingness to wonder and to doubt is not a threat to knowledge, it is its engine. It is what drives archaeologists to dig another level deeper, historians to scrutinize a faded manuscript once more, and all of us to look at a 500-year-old mystery and feel not frustration, but the thrilling possibility that the story of us is far grander and more strange than we have yet dared to dream. That single map, if we take its implications seriously, does not just add a footnote to history. It demands we rewrite the entire book. The grandest implication here is not about a lost continent, but about us, about the very nature of human time and capability. For centuries, our dominant story has been one of linear progress, a steady, upward march from simple stone tools to smartphones. We see ourselves as the pinnacle, the first and only civilization to achieve global awareness and technological sophistication. The Piri Reis anomaly and the possibility of the ancient source maps it represents shatters that comforting narrative. It introduces a profound and humbling alternative, the concept of cyclical time. This is the idea that civilizations, like species, may have their own seasons. They rise, they reach a peak of knowledge and capability, and then, through catastrophe, through the slow erosion of time, or through some great forgetting, they fall. Their achievements are buried not just under sand or water, but under the accumulating layers of millennia, until all that remains are fragments, myths, and a few inexplicable artifacts that later ages struggle to understand. In this view, our modern technological age is not the first of its kind. It may simply be the latest cycle in a series, one of perhaps many peaks in a long, rolling landscape of human and even pre-human history. This challenges our deepest assumptions about what is possible in deep time. We look at a monument like the Great Pyramid and marvel at the engineering of 4,500 years ago. But what if that achievement itself was built upon the rediscovered knowledge of a much older cycle, a cycle that had mapped the world 10,000 years before? It suggests that advanced culture, with its arts, sciences, and global perspectives, is not a unique, one-time event that began with Sumer or Egypt. It could be a potential that emerges, flourishes, and is lost again and again across the vast and mostly silent expanse of prehistory. The intervals between these peaks could be so long, so separated by ice ages or rising seas, that each new civilization rises in near total ignorance of the one that came before, believing itself to be the first to discover fire, the wheel, or the stars. Our linear timeline then becomes a local story, a history of just the most recent cycle, mistakenly believed to be the whole of human experience. The map becomes a message from a previous cycle, a piece of data that slipped through the reset. This perspective does not diminish our own achievements, but it places them in a far more majestic and mysterious context. We are not the inventors of the journey, but the latest travelers on a path that has been walked before, in epochs whose names we do not know. It asks us to look at the blank spaces on our historical and geological maps with a new kind of wonder, to consider that the silence of those millions of years may not be empty, but simply unreadable to us. It transforms the past from a known country into an undiscovered one, filled with the potential for lost cities, forgotten voyages, and entire chapters of intellectual triumph waiting to be found, or perhaps waiting to be remembered. So we are left not with an answer, but with a constellation of questions, each one pointing toward a different shadow in our past. The first and perhaps most profound question asks about the original author. Who precisely created the source maps that Piri Reis copied? Was it a single, coordinated civilization with global reach, or a network of seafaring cultures sharing knowledge across millennia? Were they human hands at all, or does the timeline force us to consider possibilities that stretch the very definition of our own story? This question of authorship is inseparable from the question of time. When were these surveys made? Was it during a recent ice age with lower sea levels, placing it within the realm of human possibility? Or does the fidelity to the bedrock point to an epoch so deep that it predates our species entirely, making the map a relic of a world we can never truly know? The second great puzzle is one of method. How was this data obtained? The map implies not just observation but measurement. To chart a coastline with such alignment to the subglacial topography requires a sophisticated understanding of the Earth as a sphere and a means to plot positions across vast, empty oceans. This suggests a mastery of spherical trigonometry and a solution to the longitude problem that would not be officially solved for another 250 years. Did they use advanced celestial navigation, a forgotten form of geometry, or some other principle lost to the ages? The third mystery is one of survival. Through what unimaginable channels did this information travel? If the original maps are ancient beyond reckoning, how did they physically endure? Were they copied onto durable materials, hidden in sealed libraries, or passed as sacred knowledge within secretive schools? The journey from that unknown cartographer to Piri Reis's desk in Istanbul is a story in itself, a saga of preservation through the collapse of empires, the burning of libraries, and the slow erosion of memory. It asks us to consider the fragile threads upon which history hangs. Finally, we must return to the most basic question of all, the question of identity. Is the landmass on the map truly Antarctica? Or is it, as skeptics maintain, a distorted version of South America, a mythical southern continent, or a simple cartographic error that we have imbued with meaning through a fortunate coincidence? This is the core of the debate, the fork in the road where all interpretations diverge. Each of these questions stands alone as a significant historical problem. Together, they form an interlocking puzzle that has resisted a century of scrutiny. No single theory has managed to answer them all without creating new, equally challenging questions. The conventional explanation solves the mystery of survival and authorship by placing it in the Renaissance, but struggles with the method and the startling accuracy. The lost civilization theory addresses method and identity, but creates a monumental puzzle of survival and timing. The geological deep time theory accounts for the data, but makes the questions of authorship and survival utterly incomprehensible. This lack of a tidy resolution is not a failure of our inquiry. It is the map's final and most important gift to us. It leaves the door wide open. It declares that the past is not a solved equation, but a living mystery, inviting each new generation of thinkers, dreamers, and discoverers to look at those faded lines and ask their own questions. The value of the Piri Reis map may not lie in the answers it provides, but in the boundless curiosity it continues to inspire. The Piri Reis map remains one of history's most captivating enigmas. This single piece of parchment does not simply sit in a museum case. It actively challenges the foundations of cartography, archaeology, and our entire understanding of human history. It is a whisper that refuses to be silenced, a splinter of doubt lodged in the timeline we thought we knew. Whether you see it as a miraculous preservation of ancient knowledge, a brilliant but misunderstood composite of Renaissance exploration, or something hovering mysteriously in between, its true power lies not in a final answer, but in the profound questions it forces every viewer to confront. It stands as a permanent monument to the idea that the world's story is far from fully written, that our libraries are missing volumes, and that our past holds shadows we have yet to illuminate. As we reach the end of this exploration, consider this final thought. Sometimes the greatest value of a mystery is not in solving it, but in the relentless journey of curiosity it inspires. That journey reshapes how we see our place in time, reminding us to approach the past with humility and wonder, always ready for the next discovery that might redraw the map of history itself. What do you think this artifact truly represents? Is it a fragment of a lost world, a cartographic coincidence, or a symbol of something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments below. Join the conversation that has spanned centuries. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, subscribe for more explorations that question the stories we take for granted. And above all, never stop questioning the maps you are given, for sometimes the most fascinating truths are found just beyond their edges.